Hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on our last Solution Lab of 2021. I'm Nicole Zafian, the head of content and education here at CLOC. We're thrilled to bring you today's session, the Solution Lab, Understanding and Effectively Implementing the Different Stages of Project Management, with our presenting sponsor, Bloomberg Law. Before we get started, I just want to point out a couple of things to help you get the most out of today's session, and please bear with me if you've been here and heard this before. On the platform, you'll notice several boxes and tools which you can use to chat with each other, share your thoughts, engage with the conversation that you're hearing. And then we have our Q&A box, which the presenters will be responding to your questions. So you can use the Q&A box to send a question for them to take throughout their presentation. Also, Bloomberg Law has provided a wonderful project management toolkit that you can access in your resources box. So click that link there to download that toolkit. We are recording today's session, so you'll be able to rewatch at any time with a link that will be sent out following the session. And with that, I want to again welcome you all for joining us, and thank you to our amazing sponsor, Bloomberg Law, for putting together today's presentation. I'll hand it over to Bloomberg Law's legal analyst, Francis Bustani. Francis?
Thank you for that information, Nicole, and thanks for the introduction. And thank you to everyone for joining today. My name is Francis Bustani, and today Karen Miller-Kwana, Bo Sylvester, and I will be presenting about understanding and effectively implementing the phases of project management. Before we begin the presentation in earnest, I would like to provide a bit of background on each of the presenters. To begin, we have Karen Miller-Kwana joining us today from Bloomberg Law, where she is a legal analyst covering legal operations and legal technology. Karen previously served as in-house counsel at a technology startup and has extensive experience in contract law, data privacy, and compliance in labor and employment. She also has considerable legal experience in labor and employment law litigation matters, having served as a senior trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Labor Civil Rights Division and as a labor and employment litigation associate in private practice. We also have Bo Sylvester joining us today from Asurion, where he serves as Director of Change Management and Customer Solutions. Bo has extensive experience in project management and legal operations, leading many projects involving technology solutions and process improvements. Prior to joining Asurion, Bo held numerous leadership positions at Walmart in the areas of international compliance, continuous improvement, U.S. compliance, health and wellness privacy, and global investigations. He actually spent a year and a half leading sensitive investigations into harassment and discrimination allegations. Additionally, Bo has more than 15 years of legal practice experience and has acted as a managing partner at his own firm. And finally, my name is Francis Bustani, and I am a legal analyst at Bloomberg Law, where I create materials covering legal operations, legal technology, and labor and employment law. My background is primarily in management consulting, where I worked in projects for law firms and other clients, where I implemented technological, process improvement, and policy solutions. We are excited that all of you joined us today. Throughout the presentation, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A tool, and we will work to answer them throughout the webinar. The main goal of today's presentation is to give everyone a better understanding of project management, particularly in the context of the legal field. Today, our discussion will focus on 4 agenda items. First, common legal operations uses for project management. Second, who can benefit from project management processes? Third, an overview of the different phases of project management. And finally, common tasks within each phase of project management. Project management is part of the CLOC Core 12, which are functional areas that most legal department operations teams oversee. These functions are critical to enabling organizations to think differently about ways to deliver business impact. Project and program management are important parts of the Core 12, and today we will discuss project management at length. I'd like to turn it over to our guest, Bo, today, because I know you are quite familiar with CLOC's Core 12. Can you provide some background on your experience with this set of functional areas, particularly as they relate to project management?
Sure, thanks, Francis. Yeah, several years ago when I came to Asurion, I was asked and brought in to kind of build out the legal operations function here. Goal was, hey, find opportunities where we can improve on manual processes, build effectiveness, and do an overall inventory of our systems and our SOPs. I didn't want to start over. One thing I'll tell you is never try to reinvent the wheel. Always look where there's something that you can take and work with. And where I went right off the bat was to the CLOC Core 12. And I used it to kind of be the blueprint for the architecture of our legal ops program. And once I did that, I was able to assess kind of to the Core 12 where we are at Asurion, which then allowed me to go and start talking to our lawyers to find out where there were gaps, where their biggest pain points were. And that allowed me to quickly build out what our prioritization plan needed to be to build out an effective legal ops function here. So, I think that if you're building out a program, this is a wonderful tool. If you have a program and you're looking to how to mature it, this is a wonderful tool. And if you want to build out some type of risk assessment to see where your gaps are, this is a wonderful tool.
Absolutely. And I know that project management and program management are only one part of the 12 different topics. Can you tell us a couple examples of how they intertwine and how project management and program management kind of apply across the board there?
Sure, absolutely. Let me give you a specific example. When I came in, our billing department was still doing the billing manually. We quickly grew from a internal legal department of about 5 people to an department of more than 50 attorneys over a short period of time. So, as I looked at where we were very immature there, and one of our priorities was to go out and find an electronic billing platform to build into it. If you think about it, the project management piece is what I had to put into place to both identify, define our scope, go through all the things you do in the project management to get us to an implementation period. But once we implement and execute, you go into the sustainability of the program management. And that's that same process, the same methodology, same thought is going to apply throughout all of your different core principles. So while you may see program management and project management here, I would say that is actually something that I would place throughout any of the core 12 principles, even though it stands by itself.
That's interesting, and the broad applicability, I think, is a reason why a lot of people are here today. But that's a really good point where we can kind of transition into the first topic on our agenda. So let's hand it over to Karen to discuss common legal operations uses for project management, and she'll ask some questions there along the way as well.
Thanks, Francis and Bo. I think that this discussion about the CLOC Core 12 is a perfect lead-in to the discussion of common uses for project management, because as Bo just described, project management principles can be useful to most, if not all, of the functional areas in the legal field. And I think it can be particularly useful if you're working in some of these areas that might overlap with other business units in the organization. With that said, there are 2 areas in legal operations where project management is more commonly used. And these include both software implementation projects, such as the implementation of software systems to manage either e-billing, as Bo just mentioned, timekeeping, e-discovery, and I think what you hear most commonly or quite frequently now is the document repository and contract lifecycle. These, another common project that is used are what are called operational process implementation projects, such as the case or legal matter intake process that happens in-house, billing processes, or even employee onboarding processes, which may, as I said, overlap with other departments in the business unit. With both of these software and process implementation projects, project management can play an essential role in gathering key requirements and objectives from stakeholders, customizing the software or processes to meet these key requirements and objectives, helping to formulate communication and change management plans, which are critical to the success of the project and the adoption of the project, user acceptance testing, and training activities. Looking at the target audiences for project management, not surprisingly, in legal operations, I'm not sure if the slides are slower on my computer. Thanks. Not surprisingly, in legal organizations, the primary target audience for project management often include legal operations professionals, or those individuals who may not have that title but are tasked with managing the legal operations of a law firm or a legal department. In addition to the functions discussed above, these operations often include projects related to organizational planning, people management, business performance, outside legal services, and legal spend, and legal technology. It is important to note, however, that project management is not limited to legal ops professionals and can also be utilized by practice leaders, general counsels and managing partners, business development professionals, both in-house and at law firms, any lawyer who's interested in improving what we would call a project, but they may call their matter management skills, and anyone who wants to effectively manage a project in the legal field or otherwise. So again, with your wealth of experience you have in this arena, both as a legal ops professional, a change management professional, and an attorney, can you just give us a few examples of projects that you've used project management tools for? I know you had mentioned the e-billing process, but anything else that you really found that these were super helpful for?
Sure. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is I didn't take on any project that I didn't implement project management skills. And here's the reason. I don't know how you plan to execute a task if you don't define, one, your problem statement. Two, who are the players that you need to be your fundamental team leads? Who has ownership of what has to be done to execute? How are you tracking it? How are you measuring it? And do you have the buy-in tone from the top? There's so many things that go into project management that you put into the everyday work you do throughout any career you have. You know, when we were preparing for this, I gave an example. I said, you know, I kind of got thrown into project management when I was at Walmart. I had no plan to go through this career path. And as I was asked to take on my first large project, I really fell back on my legal experience when I litigated. And I thought through it and I said, you know, when I got a new case, I had a set of facts and I had to build a story through that set of facts to get me from the beginning of a case through the end of a case, whether it was from a settlement or trial. And what I found was if I put those same principles to work in project management, I was able to get things done. And so as I studied later about different methodologies, what I will tell you is that when we built out our legal ops function here at Assurian, project management was essential in what we did on the e-billing platform. The three top priorities we had, by the way, e-billing, building a global document management system, and matter management. And so I used software for the matter management and for e-billing, but we actually used in-house and built out our own global document management system after doing a lot of research through different and discovery through different opportunities and platforms that were out there. For each one of those, we had to build out the right platform to go from stage to stage. If not, what I found is that you would end up in this vicious circle, the dog chasing his tail, right? So if you're not using key project management tools, essentials, thinking about the gates of where you're going, having milestones in place, I would challenge it to be really difficult to be an effective leader in putting any type of new process in place.
I think those are just excellent points, and I couldn't agree more. I love the story analogy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about planning the project. But for the moment, I'm going to turn it back to Francis, who will provide a high-level overview of the phases of project management. I think that we can build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So depending upon what kind of project an organization is undertaking, there will naturally be numerous different steps and phases of the project. And the common phases that we'll discuss today are initiation, which is also known as intake, planning, execution, monitoring, closure, and follow-up. And within each phase, there are naturally many different tasks within them. And for each phase, I'll highlight just a couple of examples that we'll, of course, discuss later on in more depth. So for like initiation and intake, the project team will usually build a business case for the project and identify important stakeholders for the project at the organization. Once you move on past initiation and intake, you go to planning, which is a pretty extensive part of the project. In planning, the project team normally creates schedules and plans with detailed tasks that the project team will accomplish, and they also secure resources for the project. Next comes execution, and this is where people who are not necessarily directly involved in the project will normally either get involved or know about it. This is where the project launches in earnest, such as launching a software or implementing a process. And once you execute, the way that you measure the metrics and the outcomes is in the monitoring phase. And in the monitoring phase, the project team normally observes the progress of the project and based on that progress, they'll determine if they need to take any more steps, have any additional training activities, or things like that. And after monitoring, normally comes project closure. So that's where the project team performs due diligence activities, such as getting project sign-off, disbands the project team, and transitions roles to permanent members of the team. And finally, follow-up comes after this. So that's the final phase of a project usually, and that's where the project team will follow up with stakeholders to handle any ongoing issues or help them with any questions they have after kind of the official closure of the project happens. There are, of course, many tasks within each of these phases, and this brief overview didn't cover them all. We'll discuss them more at length later. But for the purposes of today's discussion, we've actually collapsed initiation and planning phases, as well as closure and follow-up phases activities, and we'll discuss 4 phases: planning, execution, monitoring, and closure of a project. I'd like to bring Bo in now to discuss a little bit about his experience in projects. And Bo, during our preparation, you brought up some really interesting points that project management in legal operations and in a legal context is often different from project management in other contexts, and that one is more vertical and the other is more horizontal. Could you tell the attendees today a little bit about that and maybe provide some examples there?
Sure. I will tell you that I get to say this, and that's kind of what, because I am one. As a lawyer, lawyers think linear. They think step by step. Project managers think more, if you think about it, in parallel. They think about how things are working in conjunction with each other. So you have to know your audience as you're thinking through how your approach is going to be to a new project. So if you go in and you're like, man, I'm a great project manager, and you start throwing things in like you would in the business world of a project, I'm going to challenge you're probably going to run into some obstacles with attorneys because they just don't think that way. So how you take something that is in a linear mindset and put it into a parallel world is going to be really important to the success of your project. That's got to take part in the planning phase. The other thing I will tell you is do not underestimate that initiation and intake, because so many people don't have intake for their project work. They think about intake from a matter management standpoint. We'll get it so the lawyers know what work's coming in. If you don't have it from a project standpoint, depending on the size of your operation, what's going to end up happening a lot of times is you're going to find that there's a lot of duplication of work going on, that you'll have 3 people actually working on the same problem statement. So really having a good initiation and intake is the key to starting any project. Getting that problem statement defined, setting the tone from the top. Make sure you have the buy-in from the leadership. I'm going to give you a perfect example of I had one leader in our organization that said, hey, we need a good matter management tool that we will actually use for intake. We need it because we need to know, hey, what is the amount of work that we have for each attorney? Do we have our resources allocated right? Are we able to show the value? What is the bandwidth that we have? We don't have any way of doing that. It was kind of easy to send out an email for 5 people, but when we got to be 50, it became very hard to manage. So I took that, I ran with it, and I built out what I thought was a fantastic intake tool that we could do matter management that could be used. It was easy for the user. All the attorneys were going to love this. I was going to be a hero. Other side of the legal department, the other leader didn't really feel that that was a pain point. And so we had a great success on one side of the legal department and zero success on the other. And the lesson learned from me there was the tone from the top was not set across the whole organization. So having that set is going to be a key to success, because you can do every step that's been listed here. Francis has laid it out. By the way, you'll hear them named a bunch of different things. So don't get stuck on names. Get stuck on the work that's involved on each one. But if you don't start by saying, I've got the defined problem statement, I've gone back to my leadership, I've given them the plan, they've signed off on this, they're going to send a clear message, this is the direction we're going to go, then I'm going to tell you, you're going to run into a lot more challenges trying to get to the finish line.
Absolutely. And on the note of the kind of different philosophies between kind of the business world and the legal world, you know, in major projects, particularly ones that involve technological implementations, a lot of the time you'll have an external project manager come into the project and have maybe more of the business world in mind. Whenever that happens, do you have any advice for organizations, whether that's the legal ops professional becoming the internal PM, or tips for kind of wrangling a PM who may have different ideas than your firm or legal department does?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. I will tell you, on both our e-billing project and we later added a tool to our global document management project. In both of those instances, the software company we used brought in their own project manager to help us with implementation. It would have been really easy to go, oh, I've got a project manager, I don't have to worry about that. But just remember, they're about implementing it into your environment. They're not about the change and the implementation within your team, within the legal team, which comes with everything that you need to do on that whole buy-in piece. So don't turn them down. They're great resources. They do this every day, so they know how to implement their software. But remember, you're still the lead change agent for within that department. So it's your job to supplement their project plan with what you need to do within the broader department. I can tell you that goes outside the legal department, that goes into the business world. My current role, anytime we have a major change initiative, if it's across our enterprise, a lot of times I will have different project manager leads for different areas of the company, maybe for finance, maybe for supply chain. Still have a change owner, project manager that leads the overall process. So if you think of yourself as kind of that lead change owner with other project managers underneath you, I think you'll be set up for success.
Very good. And that's really interesting how in different settings, it can kind of bring about different flavors of project management. We obviously want to hear all of your insights about the different phases of the projects that we'll discuss today. So let's actually hand it over to Karen right now to start our first phase of discussion, which is project planning.
Thanks, Francis, and thanks, Bo. The planning phase of the project is the actual foundation of the project lifecycle and can often be the most challenging and time-consuming phase of the project managed. And as Bo has mentioned, this is the point where you have to get buy-in and know your story. So it really is important that you spend the time and the resources to get this right, because it really does lay that foundational groundwork for future success. In this phase, you're going to have your complete roadmap or plan, again, the story, as Bo mentioned, that will guide the project from execution through closure and make sure that it's laid out. And I think it is important to note, whether you're working with lawyers who sometimes will bristle at the words project management and some of the lingo that we may more commonly will see, you really can still make sure that you have this roadmap or story or matter management. Having it laid out, not necessarily what you call it, but actually knowing your steps is really going to be important. The following activities are often included in this phase: meeting with the project stakeholders to develop and document your project objectives and defining the project scope, requirements, and deliverables. As Bo just mentioned, you need to make sure you have all of the important players on the same page before you start. Developing that project plan and schedule, knowing what your next steps will be, what your timeline is, building out your project team and assigning project tasks, determining the measures of success for the project, which is often a step that is forgotten, and identifying resources needed and specifying the budget. For legal operations and legal matter management, as Bo had mentioned, the planning phase will often include an intake stage that takes place even prior to these planning activities identified above, where you have your legal issue of the project or the matter that's either requested or identified. You need to know the business unit or the client's objectives and requirements for this legal issue and confirm that you understand the complete set. The project or matter should be triaged and often classified. During this time, you can look at the risk and priority profile for the legal project and determine where that lands. Assign any subject matter expertise you need, and then also make sure you have a really good understanding of what resources you're going to need for the legal project or matter, including whether you need external resources such as outside counsel or vendors. To take a little bit of a deeper dive into kind of the activities that are included in this planning phase, I want to highlight some of the critical activities and subtasks that we've talked about and take a closer look. And as we discuss these activities, keep in mind that they often occur in tandem during the planning phase. It's not as if you have to do one to the next, but they happen at the same time. First, developing your objectives and requirements, or knowing the story you're going to tell. You want to make sure you develop the project or the matter's objectives and requirements. And the project team will need to meet with these stakeholders or the business unit clients you're working with to define the overall goal and desired outcomes of the projects. And at times you may have to resolve conflicting goals or conflicting desired outcomes and make sure that you come to a objective that everyone agrees on and understands. It's important to also take the time to ensure that your objectives and requirements are specific, measurable, appropriate, realistic, and timely. The project team also needs to define the scope of the project and identify any foreseeable risk and potential mitigations for those risks. This, of course, all happens before you even start. Next, you want to create a project plan and schedule. And again, this is a critical and often time-consuming step of the planning process, but one that is necessary and will help to ensure success. The project plan will serve as your primary tool for managing the overall legal operations project and will address the project matter and scope, the schedule, timeline, responsibilities, status updates, projected budget, and risk management. Think again about that story. This will be actually your written story that you'll read out loud or your outline for the story. You want to make sure you also include milestones and deliverables in this project plan and schedule. And for legal ops and legal matters, at this point, this may require outside or external resources. You'll have to develop a statement of work or a request for proposals during this time phase. And you want to make sure that that's prepared, evaluated, and awarded during this planning process. It's also important to identify and develop any change management and communication plans for the project or matter. Again, those are critical to really ensuring that there's buy-in and success once you build and have completed the project. Another activity during this planning phase is building your project team. For those of you who watch HGTV, teamwork makes the dream work is a phrase you'll often hear on one of the many shows that I often will find myself watching on a Saturday. Or in this case, teamwork really makes the project work. And building a project team is an important step in the planning of a project or matter. You need to take care to select members based not only on their skills, because that of course is important, but also the abilities needed for the specific project, and concentrate on selecting potential team members who add diversity of thought and skill, as well as technical knowledge. You want to make sure you don't have a lot of everyone agreeing or yes men. You want to make sure you have someone who can identify particular risk or maybe come and approach the project with a different set of skills to make sure you're covering all your bases. You also don't want to overlook the need to choose team members who can work well together, and this includes effectively communicating with each other. Lastly, the budget. Always important to pay for it. During the planning phase, it is critical that you understand both the resources that you need and that you quantify and assign cost to these resources for the project or the matter. These resources can include labor, procurement costs, operating costs, costs related to the project deliverables, and other fixed and variable costs and expenses. Not only do you need to know how much the project costs, but the budget can be used as an engine that drives the funding and can play an important role in controlling and managing the costs once the project or the matter is executed and will be an important part of the monitoring phase. The budget will also provide a guide on the final product or the process design, selecting, or other customizations. Bo, I know, again, you've had a lot of experience with intake and planning, and you spoke briefly about it. Is there anything else you'd like to add or a must-have that you'd like to talk about during the planning phase of a project?
Yeah, just a suggestion. Reverse engineering has worked well for me in the past, and that's kind of once you have your problem statement, you know what you're going out to solve. Go all the way to the end and find out what does the end look like? What does success look like? Because if you know what success looks like after you have the problem statement, it's really going to help you do the other items that are listed here. You know, as you think through building out your team, who needs to be on it? What are the strengths of that team? What are the priorities of the project? Those are the types of things that if you understand what it needs to look like, what good's going to look like, it's going to help you as you build out all of your measurements and your milestones along the way. So I would say that, you know, a little reverse engineering will go a long way here. This is, you know, it's simple. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's not meant to be. It's just really good planning and having the right people. And I think you hit on a really good point, Karen, in that a lot of times people want to go get people that are going to agree with them. And it just makes it easier. Having a few detractors as part of your project team is not a bad idea, because getting people to point out things that could be gaps or issues along the way may save you a lot of time at the end, because you fix things at each phase as you went, and then you don't throw something out, all of a sudden it starts going wrong and you're back to the drawing board. So I would always suggest find a good detractor or two to throw in there, just because it will help keep you on the tracks.
I think that's a really important part, and I appreciate that insight. I think with that, Francis, we'll turn it to you to talk about both execution and monitoring of the project lifecycle.
Absolutely, thanks. As Karen and Bo discussed, obviously a lot of planning goes into any project, but once the planning is done, a project moves along into the execution phase. During this phase, the project itself is launched in true form to the organization. If an organization, for example, worked on a software project, this is where the software launches to the organization at large, or to the relevant parties who will use it. Or if it was a process-oriented project, this is where the process is implemented. This is often whenever the project truly begins for those who aren't directly involved in the project itself. And during this phase, the following activities occur, usually among others. First, executing tasks, plans, and schedules. Lots of effort goes into these in the planning phase, and the execution phase is where many of the activities occur. Executing communications and change management activities, developing and finalizing the product or process to be implemented, executing training activities, and launching the product or process itself. Some of the most important activities within the execution phase and their subtasks include, first, executing plans and schedules. In the planning phase, resources go into developing the plans and schedules that the project will follow. And in the execution phase, the project team really starts to use them in real form. These guide the project and tell the project team what needs to be done and when. Second, developing the product or process. The focal point of any product or any project will usually be the product or process that they're seeking to implement or change. And during the execution phase, the project team will usually take the requirements that were gathered in the planning phase from stakeholders and ensure that the items that they launch, whether it's a product, piece of software, or something else, that they meet the requirements of the stakeholders. Third, and quite importantly, the project team will perform training activities. This is a crucial part of the execution phase, because it helps to improve adoption and helps the organization understand the product and process, and not only how it works, but also where it fits into each individual within the organization. During training, it's sometimes coupled with change management activities, and the organization is taught about how this will impact their workflows, what the original process looked like and what it will look like in the future, or the same for software, what the legacy software looks like now and what it will look like in the future. And change management can provide and really complement training activities. And finally, and very importantly, launching the product or process. The launch of the product or process to the larger organization is the culmination of all of the work that's taken part in the planning and execution phases thus far, and thus it's very important and a very important part of the execution phase. So there are numerous other activities that can occur during the execution phase during a project. And I'd like to bring in Bo here to discuss some of his experiences as they relate to the execution phase. So based on your experience, can you tell us a bit about what you believe are some of the more important aspects and tasks of the execution phase?
Sure. Sylvia had a question talking about, we had talked about this before, a waterfall approach, and do people use hybrid approaches or agile? It's a great question. In fact, we had discussed it. Now, I will tell you, I am not, as you can clearly see, a classically trained project manager. What I am classically trained on is getting it done. So I would say execution is probably something that's very dear to my heart. And the answer there is that I believe, especially in a fairly complex implementation, and by the way, software in most legal environments is considered complex, that I would not get tied to any one methodology. I would look at what you need there, and you may apply several different ones to one project. You may have some agile sprints that are part of a project that you're still using Six Sigma methodology from end to end. The big thing I would tell you is if you really know your audience and you know your core team, kind of put the plan together that's going to allow them to operate effectively. That's one key takeaway on execution. The other I will tell you is that don't try to be a subject matter expert on everything. Your team that you're putting together should be comprised of the subject matter experts that you need for a project. You may own a lot of the tasks, you may own a few of the tasks, but on any task that you don't own, I would consider myself kind of the coach of a team, and the task owners are my players. So I'm going to give them the plan, I'm going to facilitate, but I've got to let them go play and execute the game plan. And if you try to put a thumb on everything, you may actually cause things to slow down or get off track. So trust your team, don't be a SME. And then the final thing I will say is for every task, know what your measurement of success is. It's not just a task. Who owns the task and what is our measurement of success? Those are kind of the key points, I think, that if you put into play, you will find that execution can go really smoothly.
Right. And in that same vein as, I guess, project management methodologies being somewhat rigid, how would you, or what advice would you give to a legal operations professional kind of taking in all this information and saying, I have to do this step by step, I have to have a charter, I have to have a plan? Like, how did you handle that in the past? And is it okay to sometimes skip steps? Are some parts more important than others? Like, what would you say is kind of some sage advice from your end?
Yeah, I will say I listened to my leadership. There was a lot of things that would come about what they expected. If there was some, hey, we really need a business plan, I don't know if this is needed, then I would get a lot more regimented in what I put together in my documentation early on to try to gain their confidence on what they were seeing. Again, that goes to telling the story. If we kind of had to buy in and it's just, hey, please go do this. And let's get it done fast. So time is more important. Then I'm not going to go through, I'm going to skip some of those things that are just there to document. I'm going to try to get into how fast can I get what I need to do to get this thing moving forward. So to that point, I would say, what is the reason for the project? What is the strategy behind it? And what does win look like? And that'll probably determine what you need to do from a whole, how much do I need to put in pure project management step by step? Or how much is this going to be just I know what needs to be done. I need to get right people to the table, and I'm going to plan and go, and I'm not going to be tied to any one strategy or methodology.
Very good point. And as you go through a project, whether it starts in planning or you're in the closure phase, I think that that's really valuable information across the board. So I think now is probably a good time to move on to the next phase, which is monitoring. I will be discussing this. So after project execution occurs, the project team will move into the monitoring phase, where it observes the adoption of the project among other metrics. In this phase, the project team will usually complete many activities, including monitoring project metrics, monitoring the timeline of deliverables and the timeliness of deliverables, monitoring stakeholder satisfaction, and making adjustments as necessary. Some of the important sub-steps within these parts include, first, monitoring project metrics and budget. In terms of project metrics, it is important for the project team to keep an eye out on how the project is performing in terms of both adoption and employee performance. This can help to identify areas of improvement where the project team may need to tweak a project or add additional training opportunities. Second, monitoring stakeholder satisfaction is also important. This helps the project team to know how management and other stakeholders feel about the project, and if they desire any changes down the road or any that need to be made now. And finally, this information helps to make adjustments. Making adjustments is a critical part of the monitoring part of a project. When metrics are reviewed, they often help to inform areas of deficiency, and any of these areas can sometimes be addressed by a change in the project. The project monitoring phase is critical to the success of the project, as it provides the project team and organization a pulse on how the project is performing, and it also informs them of any changes that may be needed. Bo, can you tell us some of the metrics or methods that you use to measure the success or measure adoption of a project in the past?
Sure. I will say this, I have clear milestones for every project, no matter how large or small or how simple or complex. I build a scorecard. My scorecards are typically a template, very simple. And what we're doing there is I'm going to my core team and say, what are we trying to accomplish? And we're going to have a scorecard that we're going to provide for each area and each team member for our core team meetings. We're then going to take that scorecard and build it into a one-pager that we'll provide to leadership as we give an update on that. Or if you're doing it from a portfolio standpoint, for each project, you've got a one-pager for each project that builds your portfolio. I love the red light approach. I'll be the first one to tell you, red, green, yellow. Green, everything's on track. We're doing great. Yellow, to me, is, hey, there's some risk, but we're not off track. We can still deliver, but I want to make sure that my leaders and my owners know that we do have some risks that we've got to identify and go get. Also allows me to do a little deeper dive and monitor those closer. And then red, hey, if we don't get this right, we're not going to meet our deadline. We're going to go off budget. Those are all things that are just easy to kind of keep up. It's easy to bubble up. Remember, the more you bubble up, probably the less they want to know. It's more of that you're at ground level. A lot of times you're in it, and then you've got to go to that 10,000 or 50,000 foot view. So having that built in from your monitoring of your team makes it really easy to build up those higher viewpoints. As I said, I've done that on every project, no matter what. And you can do it whether you're there are times where, especially in legal ops, you're a one-person show. You're responsible. So when I tell you about, hey, get the team, do this, you're like, well, I am the team. I am the SME. I have to do it all. I hear you, but I will also say that that's where you have to get creative, and you have to kind of build a team within the legal department that they're part of your legal ops team. They just don't know it. So that's your core people you're going to, that you're bringing into your team, that you're dropping off. So I just, if you are one person team and you don't do that, what's going to happen is your bandwidth's going to get eaten up really quick. and it can be very frustrating from you from a professional and personal standpoint, and it can mean you're maybe not optimizing what they want you to do. So don't just get caught up in, oh my gosh, they won't hire anybody, I'm by myself. Remember, you have other people working with you. Go build them into your team. Sometimes you have to do it through a Jedi mind trick. But to this point, I will say the monitoring is just that simple. It is build your scorecard with your team, with your task. You're monitoring along the way, and you bubble it up, and that'll keep you online for your projects. And do not get away from doing it because you say, this is simple, it's going to be easy, I don't need to do it, because it will bite you in the butt every time.
No, that makes complete sense. I guess one thing that a number of people who work on projects find is that the execution to monitoring phase kind of bleed into one another. Can you tell us some of the differences and similarities you experience on both of those? Do they kind of bleed together for you, or do you find them to be very separate and distinct?
That's a good question. I will say that they can bleed together. I mean, you have to control it. There's no better way to say it, in that you control what comes in, you control what goes out. As a project manager, whether you're doing it by yourself as owning a project end to end, or whether you're doing it with a team, you have to own the messaging. You have to own what comes in and what goes out. And I will tell you that with any project, and I hope this is answering the question, I apologize if it's not, Francis, the communication needs to come from one person, because if a bunch of people are trying to tell the story, they're going to hear it different ways, and it can create a lot of noise and confusion and extra work. So that's not trying to be a dictator in something. Just remember that a lot of people may have roles, but if you're the ultimate owner of the project, the one they're going to hold responsible and accountable for it, then make sure that you're the one being the storyteller. You're the one that's getting the data in. You're the one that's getting the data out. You're the one that's assessing the risk. You're the one that's making the decision on where the project is. So you have to control it. If not, it will bleed.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting take on that. I think now we've kind of pretty extensively covered planning, execution, and monitoring. So let's move along, and we'll go to Karen to discuss project closure.
That's great. Thanks, Francis. And I just would like to, I think, connect the two. I think one of the questions I saw in the chat was, what do you do if you're both the subject matter expert, the project manager, and then when you close the project, you're transitioning it to yourself? And I think it's really important, as Bo mentioned, to focus on that monitoring, because I think in the monitoring process where you are creating those scorecards, even if you are a one-person team, and doing your red, yellow, and green lights, I think it really does help as you close to be able to say, I've checked all these boxes, and now I'm going to transition it. Even though I'm still the same person, I am transitioning the project and closing it, and now I'm in the actual continuation of the project. The project management phase is done, and now we're rolling forward. So as I talk about closure, I want to make sure I don't talk about it as if it is a one-person team, but I think that is an excellent question, and these stages and activities will apply regardless. You just seem to almost being creative and changing your hat, but communicating that you are wearing a particular hat at one time and changing it, and the documentation and monitoring really is important to that. So closing the project, not surprisingly, final phase of the project life cycle. This is the stage where all project or matter deliverables are finalized, any long-term tasks and responsibilities are formally transferred, and the following activities included in this phase will include drafting a project closing report, hosting a project closing meeting and identifying lessons learned, project due diligence and archiving any necessary project or matter information, transitioning responsibilities and tasks to the next phase of the project or process, and releasing the project team. And at this point, celebrating the end of the project. I highly recommend margaritas. But before you start drinking, you want to make sure that you just don't high five everyone and say, good job. You do when you complete a project, especially one that's taken a significant amount of resources and time and effort to complete. It is important to really resist the urge to just close without completing some of these critical steps. and I'd like to spend a little time highlighting 3. The first is hosting a closure and lessons learned meeting. Again, even if you're by yourself, host this meeting with yourself. This you can do with margaritas, but if you're with a team, I recommend doing it with the team without any alcoholic beverages. But it's critical that you really understand and provide to your project stakeholders, the organization, provide that overview of the life cycle of the project and what happened, what you accomplished, summarize the work that was performed, demonstrate that all the deliverables have been completed. You want to obtain final sign-off or formal confirmation that the project is complete and has met the objectives. You also want to identify and document the successes, failures, and lessons learned throughout the project. The goal here is to help the organization and the project team learn what went right, what went wrong, and how to avoid similar challenges with future projects or matters. Next, the project team is going to want to perform any necessary due diligence to ensure that the project or matter met its stated goals within the confines set out from the start. This likely includes reviewing the project plan and charter to ensure that the project delivered on all asks from the organization. It may also include reviewing the budget and auditing any spending that occurred throughout the project. I think one of the other questions I saw was a question about what do you do, or how some of the legal technology vendors don't focus on training. This is the perfect time to do that due diligence and make sure that that training has been completed. Even if their project manager hasn't done it, that it's included and been completed as part of your project lifecycle. The project team is also going to need to memorialize and archive all relevant and important information, documents, and data related to the project or the legal matter. And it is really important at this phase. And again, this is something that I think when you're done, everybody's ready to just, close the project and move on. But it is important to organize and store these archived materials in a manner that makes the information easily accessible for future reference, particularly to those you're transitioning the product to, or in the event of an audit. Finally, the project team needs to transition and assign any permanent or ongoing duties and responsibilities related to the project to the appropriate individuals, and formally release or reassign the project team. For example, troubleshooting and overall software management tasks will be transferred to the IT department if you're doing a new software launch project, or ownership of document and file maintenance may go to HR at the close of a process-based project. Again, Bo, with all of your experience in project management, are there any must-do steps that you make sure that you always cover when you undertake a closing phase?
Absolutely. First, let me say, Eileen, I'm stealing it. I love it. You're absolutely right. Monitoring is like making toast and making sure it doesn't burn. Fantastic. I'm going to use that. And I'm jealous because I like to pride myself on coming up with good things like that. So that's a really good one.
I'm going to steal it as well, Bo.
There you go. Here's one of the things I will say. Do not underestimate celebration. And I wouldn't wait to closure. Celebrate along the way. Celebrate milestones. You have to motivate people. And people aren't motivated if you don't let them know they're doing a good job. And take a minute when you've done something, especially if it's hard, to sit back and pat everybody on the back and then get right back to it. So celebrate success all the way along the way, and then have a big celebration at the end. Every project has to have an end. I hear what you're saying. What if I own it later? It's still a project until you have finished implementation and you're executed, you've tested everything. At that point, it becomes program management. And it's a very big distinction in understanding the two. Because if you're always in project management, you're always going to be looking at trying to get to the finish line, and you'll never feel like you quite got there. So if you get there, make that distinction, close that project, and then get into program management. And if you're a one-person show, understand what your programs are you own as opposed to what your projects you own. That's another way, though, to also have effective portfolio management, because you need to understand what projects are active and where they are and what stage. So knowing when to close a project is essential. Let's see, I made another couple notes. Always have a mindset of continuous improvement. You have to be flexible. These things will change, scopes will change. So being flexible and being able to get in and quickly change as things are thrown at you is important to success. And then I will tell you two things: document, save, because a lot of the projects are going to come back. I'll give you an example, and especially in the legal field where now software is coming out almost daily. New companies are launching products. You're seeing things that are that was state of the art a year ago are now becoming obsolete. When I came in, I told you that we were doing manual billing. Go out and get a billing. There were only a few major players that we had to choose from when we went and looked at e-billing at that time, and we chose one. And a year later, we found out that, man, all these new software tools were out there, and there were actually better products that fit us better. And so we went back and changed software a year after implementation. And by the way, legal billing implementation didn't happen in 30 days. So it felt like I never stopped on that project. But I had all of my documentation on what I did the first time. I was able to draw to, and it saved a lot of time. So don't think once you've done one project, you can kind of throw all that away. You'll never have to come back to it. Save it, have a good repository of your work. And then the final thing is test, test, test. I like to use pilots, even if I'm within a corporate law firm group. I may take 3 or 4 people and make a pilot to test what I'm doing before I take it to the broader group. So test along the way, but then test at the end before you take something out. It'll save you a lot of heartache and egg on your face, because there are times that things just don't work, and that includes training. If you're putting together a training, get 1 or 2 people, do the training to them, get feedback, refine your training before you take it out to the big group. So the more you do that, the more you're prepared, the more it'll be better when you do a wider launch.
Thanks so much, Bo. I think that's just great. Those are great points to make. I know we're running short on time, so I think we're going to, we have one other slide on takeaways that we're going to probably skip. I think everyone here can glance at the takeaways, but I do hope you've had some good ones. And with that, I would like to thank everyone and leave a few minutes for questions, but thank everyone for attending this Bloomberg Law and CLOC webinar today. We hope you found the information informative and learned more about project management and practical uses for lawyers and legal ops professionals. Recently, Bloomberg did release some practical guidance on project management for legal operations, which features almost 30 new documents to support legal operations projects. These materials include overviews, checklists, and worksheets that can be utilized to help ensure success through all stages of a legal ops project. Bloomberg Law subscribers can access the complete collection of the new practical guidance on the Project Management for Legal Operations topic page. However, if you're not a subscriber, feel free to download the Legal Operations Project Management Toolkit, a sample collection of Bloomberg Law's Project Management Practical Guidance, which provides high-level overview of different aspects of project management that can be used to strategically plan a legal operations project. A link to the toolkit is available on this slide, and that link will also be included in a follow-up email that CLOC will send to all attendees. And in closing, I'll pass it to Nicole to handle any remaining housekeeping matters. And then, as I said, we'll quickly look through the questions and answers and see if there's anything we missed. Nicole?
Thank you so much, Karen and Francis and Bo, for sharing this incredibly valuable information. It was great to hear the real-world experiences from Bo, and Francis and Karen for this great work that Bloomberg Law has put together in this toolkit. Also, a huge thank you to Bloomberg Law for sponsoring today's session. CLOC also has a legal project management committee doing work in this area, so please head over to the Community Connect on cloc.org if you're interested in exploring that further as well. It has been a really great year of Solution Labs and Ask the Experts sessions, so thank you all for continuing to engage with CLOC and our offerings. I hope everyone enjoys the holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.